So first, what exactly is the difference between a checked and an unchecked exception? Well, a checked exception is one that is checked for at compile time. Let's say we have a method in our program where we want to just read from a file. And we can call this read file method from our main method here just by doing read file and passing in the name of the file that we want. But as you can see here, Eclipse is giving us an error. It says unhandled exception type file not found exception. So what's happening here is when we try to create this file reader, if the name of the file that we pass in doesn't actually exist, it could throw a file not found exception. And Java is telling us that we need to deal with the possibility of this file not found exception happening when this piece of code is called. And that is because a file not found exception is a checked exception. Checked exceptions are exceptions that Java makes you deal with one way or another at compile time. So how do we deal with this error that we get for checked exceptions? Well, we can do it in one of two ways. The first way is that you can surround this line of code that throws the exception with a try-catch block. The other way you can deal with that error is instead of having a try-catch, you can just tell Java, yep, I'm not going to deal with it. So I'm just going to declare to you, Java, that I could throw it, and whatever piece of code that calls this method, they're just going to have to deal with that exception themselves. And to do that, you just put a throws declaration right here in the method signature, right before the curly braces. All right, so great. Now we no longer have that error here in our code that we had before, but now we actually have an error here where we're calling our read file method, and it's the exact same error. So that exception will just get thrown from this method out to whatever piece of code called that method. Since this line calls that method, now this line could throw a file not found exception. Now we can deal with the possibility of that exception being thrown here. We could surround the statement with a try-catch, or if we don't want to do that, we can just declare that we throw this exception in the method signature. Now you'll notice that putting that throws declaration here doesn't cause another error like it did when we put the throws declaration down here. And that's only because this method is the main method at the very top of our program. Once that exception gets thrown up past your main method, your program just dies right there immediately, and all you'll see is a stack trace output for that exception. All we did was tell Java, hey, I'm gonna throw that exception. We didn't have anything that actually dealt with it. So what does it look like with unchecked exceptions? Let's say we just had a method like this one here that just takes in a string, we'll call it my string, and all it does is just print out the length of that string. So up here we could declare a string, let's call it name, and then we can call that print length method. And of course it prints out 4 because the length of John is 4 characters. But what would happen if instead of initializing this name string to John, we set it equal to null? So then when it tries to take that parameter and call the length method on it, it's going to get a null pointer exception because this my string will be null. And if we run it, of course, we do see that it gets a null pointer exception. But Java doesn't give us any compilation errors here. It compiles fine and then only explodes when we actually run it. And that is all because null pointer exception is an unchecked exception. Java doesn't make us catch it with a try-catch block, and it doesn't even make us declare it here in the method signature that we might throw a null pointer exception. That's the main difference between checked and unchecked exceptions. That doesn't mean you can't do those things though. If you want to, you can absolutely. It just doesn't really matter whether you do or not. And you also absolutely can add a try-catch around this piece of code, and you probably should, because if you don't, that exception is going to get thrown and your program is going to die just like it did for us here.